Hello everyone and welcome to today's ATX InFocus webinar for the September 2024 exams. My name is Kirsty McIsaac and I am the Solutions Management Lead in the Education Solutions and Student Support team here at ACCA. The title of our webinar today is Examiners Report Unlocked, and it's designed to support you with key insights from the latest Examiners Report for Advanced Taxation, or ATX. I am delighted to welcome our expert tutor, Helen Forster, who is going to help you prepare for the upcoming exam. During the session, she will take you through technical examples from previous exams and share practical advice for tackling the September exams. She will also talk about the strategies you should adopt to avoid common pitfalls and improve your exam performance. And of course, we'll have some time for live Q&A at the end of our session as well. Before I hand you over to Helen, I'd just like to cover a few housekeeping items very quickly. At the bottom of your screen, there are a number of buttons that you can use. So firstly, there is a help icon, which provides resources and information to help you resolve any technical issues that you might experience. There are icons for both the slides and the media player. You'll need to be able to see both of these during the webinar, so please make sure that you do have those selected. The attendee chat function allows you to engage with fellow webinar attendees, but we would ask you to not share personal details in the chat, and that does include things like your WhatsApp and your LinkedIn details. And finally, you have the resource list. And that's the icon that looks like a file symbol. If you click on that, you'll be able to access resources that are relevant to today's webinar, including the direct links. You can rearrange your screen to suit you and resize the windows if you need to. And if at any point you can't hear what we're saying or you can't see any visuals, please try refreshing your browser, as that quite often fixes the issue. So by registering for this webinar today, it means that you will be sent an email tomorrow that has details of how you can listen to it again. So don't worry if you miss something or if you do have any technical issues, you will be able to access the recording from tomorrow. I'm going to hand you over to Helen in just a moment, and I will be back with you to wrap up at the end of the session. If you would like to ask Helen or the ACCA team a question, please post those in the Q&A window, not the attendee chat. Just keep them in the Q&A window if you want somebody to look at them and potentially answer them. Now, unfortunately, we can't guarantee responding to everybody directly, either through the live Q&A or the web chat. But we do hope that the questions that we are going to be able to share will be helpful to everybody. So with no further ado, I will hand you over to Helen to get started.
Thanks very much, Kirsty. So I'm Helen Forster, and I've been working for Kaplan since 1997. I've stopped trying to work out how long that is, but during that time, I've been a tax tutor. So I've taught a lot of students, marked a lot of exams, and I'm also a content specialist. So I help to prepare Kaplan's tax material, so the printed material, the online material. And I'm hoping that I can share some of my insights and knowledge with you today. So, as Kirsty said, what we're going to be covering in this lecture is some key insights from the examiner's report. So I'll pick out some most important points from there. I'm going to go through a technical example. So I've actually got an example from the most recent exam that I want to look at with you. Give you a bit of practical advice. What can you do between now and the exam to improve your chances? Some things to look out for, so things that commonly go wrong and how you can avoid making those mistakes. And there should be some time at the end for your questions. So if you have any questions as we go through, then please make sure that you ask those. Pop them in the panel, and then we run through those at the end. So we're going to start with a look at the examiner's report. Now, the examiner's report, the most recent one, is from the March and June sittings. However, having said that, the exam that's actually been released is the June 2024 exam. So sometimes a selection of questions might be released from March and June. Because June was the first sitting under the new Finance Act, So this was the first sitting under Finance Act of 2023. I think that's why they've released the whole of that June exam. And so we've got 3 questions, and it was a fairly typical exam in June. First question for 50 marks has some corporation tax. We've got some VAT, group registration, and for land and buildings. There's a bit on transfer pricing. And then we've got some capital gains tax and, of course, the 5 marks on ethical issues. So that first question will often include a mixture of personal tax, corporation tax, but apart from the ethics, pretty much anything can be tested there. The second question that was released is partly inheritance tax. So inheritance tax, we do very often see for round about 15 marks in the exam. And then there was partnership loss relief and a bit on loan interest relief. And the third question was income tax overseas aspects, which is another fairly common area in the exam, with some capital gains tax overseas aspects, and then a bit on employment benefits. So we have a proper mixture there. Now, one thing that the examining team has asked me to share with you, and I think this is in response to feedback that they've had from recent exams, is that not all of the so-called core topics will be tested in every exam. So don't be disappointed if corporation tax groups, for example, doesn't come up, because it's not guaranteed. There is no guarantee that anything on the syllabus will be tested. All the ACCA will say is that the syllabus will be tested in a fair and balanced way, but you can't expect the exam to cover the whole syllabus. Now, unfortunately, you do need to look at the whole syllabus because you don't know which bits are going to come up. But if you've got a good knowledge of all the key taxes, then hopefully you should be able to score a pass. But they have pointed out that there are only 3 questions. So unfortunately, you may be disappointed if your favourite topic doesn't come up. Now, one thing that the examiner did at the end of the report was to set out some very useful keys to success. So the students who passed this exam and did well in the exam demonstrated various qualities. So one thing that they did was they had sufficient and precise knowledge of the tax rules. You do have to know the rules to pass this exam. It is a technical exam. And one thing that's really important is that you know the brought forward rules from TX as well. And particularly those of you who had an exemption from the TX exam. So if you were exempt because you studied tax at university, for example, then you do need to make sure that you refresh that knowledge. Now, one thing that you can do to help you with that is to go onto the ACCA's website and have a look at the TX articles. So there are articles on all of the key taxes for TX, basic corporation tax, there's basic income tax. And then you've also got some topic explainer videos there. So things like basic inheritance tax, I know because I did that one, but there are various topic explainer videos, just fairly short videos that go through some of the key basics. So as well as the ATX syllabus, you need to make sure that you don't forget the rules from your earlier studies. And those will get tested still in the ATX exam, but just in a slightly different way. So rather than, say, just calculating a car benefit, you might have to explain how it's calculated, but you need to know how to do that in order to be able to provide the explanation. So the TX rules are still important. Sometimes they might get tested more than others. I did actually count up in one of the exams, and I think it was something like 40% of the technical content was actually brought forward from TX. So it is really, really key. Now, unfortunately, just knowing the rules is not enough to get you through the exam. And this is where I think often people fall down, is they know the rules, but to pass the advanced tax exam, you have to apply your rules. So if you always put yourself in the position of being a tax advisor, because that's what you're going to be, somebody asks you a question, they want you to apply your knowledge to their specific scenario. How should I leave my assets? Should I give them away while I'm alive, or should I leave them in my estate? So if you imagine that you're advising a real person and providing that individual with useful information, then that should help for you. And you need to make sure that you read and address each of these specific requirements. Very, very important. Read the requirement, read it again, read it again. What exactly is it asking you to do? And the requirements, as I will show you when I go through the technical example, will be quite specific. They might ask you about one very specific area of tax. And if it's not in the requirement, there won't be credit for it in your answer, even if it's correct. So look at the requirement and make sure that you answer that specific requirement, not the requirement that you would like them to have set. Take the time. So particularly now that we have the professional skills marks, we have a little bit more time for the technical part of the answer, which means that you should hopefully have time to think before you start. So think before you start, think about what you're going to write, think, is this actually relevant to the requirement? And make sure that you manage your time. And I'll talk more about time management as well a bit later on. Some of the top tips as well that I've picked out from the examiner's report. And I do recommend that you read the whole report. So I've just picked out some of the key points here. Very important that you look at the command words in the requirement. So the ones that are most often used in the advanced tax exam are explain. Explain means words. You must have a written explanation. Calculate, fairly obviously, is numbers. And if a requirement just says to calculate, you don't need to explain as well. So read very carefully. And advising usually means possibly a mixture of the two, but usually means coming to some kind of conclusion. So advise on the best option, for example, means that you need to consider both options and say which one you think is the best with reasons. As you read through the questions, just bear in mind that all of the information is there for a reason. So if there's a bit of information about, how long somebody's been in the UK, for example, how long they've owned their business, just think, why have they told me this? Because it will be relevant. If it gives you some information about, let's say, a company claiming all possible reliefs, then think, well, that means that there must be a relief for me to consider here. So everything that you see in the question, think, why have they told me this? Why might it be relevant? And then hopefully that will give you some clues as to what that part of the question is about. If you have different individuals in the question, look at the relationship. So are you dealing with a married couple, which has special tax implications? Is it a parent and a child, for example? So that might be relevant. Companies, is it a group of companies? What type of group is it? That is going to have implications as well. So think very carefully about the relationships between the individuals and companies and how that's going to affect your answer. Don't repeat information from the question. Although you need to use the information from the question, from the scenario, you won't score marks just for repeating. So you need to be doing something with that information. You need to apply your rules to those bits of information, to the facts. So purely writing out information from the question won't score, but giving some advice and using that information is what is going to get you the marks. And you need to be very precise in this exam, particularly, for example, if you're talking about losses, let's say. So if you're talking about relief for losses, then there's no point in just saying, oh, the loss can be carried forwards. That doesn't tell me anything. What can it be set against? Exactly what type of income? When do I have to make a claim? If I have to make a claim, when do I have to make that claim? If there's a capital gains tax relief, what exactly are the conditions? How long do I need to have held the asset? What percentage of shares do I need to have held? So you must be very, very precise. If you're doing calculations, then make sure that you show all of your workings. And just be aware as well that in the spreadsheet, the marker can have a look inside a cell to see a formula that you've used, but you should still make sure that you break your calculations down. So for example, if you're doing an income tax computation and you're deducting a personal allowance and you're working out tax at 3 different rates, don't do all of that in one cell, because the marker will hate you and it will be very, very difficult to follow if you don't actually get the right answer. So you should show the personal allowance separately. You should show each line for each different rate of tax that you've applied separately, and ideally show the percentage that you've applied as well. You can do the workings in the cell, but make the marker's life easier. Remember that this exam is marked by a real person, not by a computer, not by artificial intelligence. It's marked by a real person, and anything that you can do to make that real person's job easier is going to help you. Okay, so they will look at all the answer that you've produced, but it's really helpful if you can actually show your workings and break that calculation down. And if you come across something where you don't have the information, so for example, if you're thinking, have we got a capital gains tax annual exemption? Have they made other disposals during the year? And that information is not there, then you need to state an assumption or state what's missing. And sometimes there will be professional marks for that, for skepticism. So if you don't have enough information, you might need to make an assumption in order to answer the question. So those are just a few tips when you're practicing questions. Those are things that you need to think about that will help to improve your chances of doing well. Now, for a technical example, what I thought I would do is to have a look at question 1, which is the big 50-mark question from the most recent exam. I haven't got time, obviously, to go through the whole of that, but what I want to illustrate to you, because I know often, certainly my students find this quite scary, which it is to show you how to approach that question, how to use the software, how to interpret the requirements, and how to go about presenting your answer. Now, it's a bit difficult, unfortunately, for me to demonstrate that to you live. So here's one I prepared earlier. You will need to use the media screen for this. So what I'm going to do is to play you a video which will take you through that first question, or the first part of that first question, to show you how I would go about approaching that question. Obviously, we're all different, so you might have different ways of doing it, but I thought it might be useful for you to see how I would start that question and go about preparing my answer in the exam. So I shall press play, and hopefully the video will play for you now. So this is question 1 from the June 2024 exam, which is the big 50-mark question. And in the middle of the screen, we have the summary of all of the areas that are covered by this question. So this is really useful to give you a feel for what you're going to need to be thinking about. This one, we've got a sale of a subsidiary company. We have a sale by a company of a building and an intangible asset, bit on group VAT registration, VAT for the sale of a building, pricing strategy, might be transfer pricing maybe. And we've also got the gift of shares to a trust and to an individual. And there's a reference to some ethical considerations as well. So the best way to think of this big 50-mark question is like lots of separate individual short questions, and that makes it much easier to deal with. We've got the exhibits down the side of the screen, so we need to look at those as we go through. And the requirement, you can pretty much ignore that, because all the requirement does is just to tell you to look at exhibit 4. So we know that this first question will have 40 technical marks and 10 professional skills marks. So we can get rid of that. And I would always start with the requirement, the work to be carried out. So I like to have a look at the requirements before I look at the exhibits so that I know what I've got to do. And this is where you'll find the mark allocation and the detailed requirements. And what I would normally do is in the exam, the 3 hours and 15 minutes, I would probably spend most of the 15 minutes actually reading through all of the information for question 1, because this is the biggest question that you've got the most to get your head around. And so I would have a look through all of these requirements, look at the number of marks available. I can see 5 marks there, a reference to the general anti-abuse rule, tax evasion and avoidance. So that's the 5 ethical marks, which are the only guaranteed marks. That's the only topic that's guaranteed to come up, although obviously there are lots of different things that they could test in that ethics section. So you could do that bit first if you wanted to. The beauty of doing this as a computer-based exam is that even if you did do that first, in your answer, you can still actually put that in the order in which the question appears. So you don't have to, but sometimes it helps with the flow if you answer the requirements, or at least present your answer in the same order as the requirements in the question. So what I want to do is just to show you how I would start my answer, how I would approach this. I'm not going to go through the whole thing, obviously, we don't have time. So this whole question, if you've allocated 15 minutes for reading, it's a 3-hour exam, so half of that, an hour and a half, is what you should be spending in total on question 1. And if you allocate your time based on the technical marks, then that gives you 2.25 minutes per technical mark. And the professional skills marks we should hopefully just be picking up on the way. So this first part of the question on corporate matters, we've got the very first part of this, which is worth 10 marks. So I need to be spending 2.25 minutes per mark, 22 minutes-ish, so say 20 minutes on this first part of the question. And I would then take a look at the clock, have a look at what time I need to be wrapping up this section. You might want to make a note. You could use the scratch pad. I don't use the scratch pad for anything else because sometimes you might put stuff in there and then forget to copy it into your answer and the marker will never see it. Now let's have a look at the detailed requirement. First of all, it says to write a memorandum. So what I would do straight away, use the word processor. So if we're writing a memorandum, I would always start that in the word processor. And you need to get used to having all of these screens open at the same time. So this is where you really must practice. And we need a memorandum for the Lark Group client file to assist us in preparing for a meeting. We've got the date. So all you need to do is to set it up to, from, date and subject. So set that up. And that's the only thing that you know is going to earn a professional skills mark potentially. So there will be skills marks for communication, and for setting things up in the correct format, then that is probably going to be worth one of those marks. So not just for putting that heading, but for them presenting your answer in a nice, easy to read format using headings, subheadings, that kind of thing. Now, the other thing to note here, it says, and this is a really big clue, that the Lark Group claims all possible tax deductions and deferrals in respect of both tangible and intangible assets. Now, that's a massive clue. Whenever they give you information like that, that means that there almost certainly will be some kind of deduction or deferral. So you need to start thinking straight away, why have they told me this? What kind of deferral could we have? And the only one that I can really think of is rollover relief, which could apply for tangible or intangible assets. So I need to look out for that as I go through the information. Now, when it comes to what the memorandum needs to cover and the actual requirements, then I like to actually put these into my Word document. So you can copy and paste, or you could type them out, but put those in, and that is then going to be a nice structure with some headings so that I can start filling in my answer as I find the bits of information in the exhibits. So I've just copied the requirement, but it's really important, and the examining team have said, that you don't just copy and paste the requirement, you need to think about that requirement as well, which is where sometimes typing it out might help, or you can copy and paste, which is what I've done here, and I've just then amended it and got rid of some of the extra bits. So option 1 is explaining the corporation tax implications for Lark Limited. So we need some words. We're looking at corporation tax for Lark Limited for a sale of shares. Option 2, again, explaining, more words, the corporation tax implications for STV Limited, different company, and stamp duty land tax implications of a sale of the Strick building. So very, very specific. And then we also need to calculate the taxable profit from the sale of the S trademark. So calculate means that I will probably want to use the spreadsheet for that part of my answer. 10 marks in total, and we've got 3 separate things to do here. So 3 separate things, 10 marks. We're only looking at sort of 3 to 4 marks for each of these. And that should give you an idea of how much you need to write. So you're not going to be writing huge amounts for each of these sections. You need to keep it very, very focused, very specific. So the next thing is then to have a look at Exhibit 1, where all of the information that we need is going to be. And again, I can move these windows around and have these two open side by side. So then as I go through, if I find something useful, then I can just make a note directly in my answer. And it takes practice. It's not easy. So you do need to practice doing this. So Exhibit 1 is quite a long exhibit. We've obviously got a group structure, but what you shouldn't do is just start by making notes of all the possible groups that exist. So make sure that you keep your answer focused, look at exactly what it is you're being asked to do, rather than just starting with any sort of general analysis. So we know that we're going to be selling STV Limited, which is a 100% subsidiary of Lark Limited, and it was acquired on the 1st of May 2018. It's now February 2024, so we're looking at roughly 5 to 6 years ago. They're all trading companies, all prepare accounts to the 31st of March. And for this part of the question, we're not really concerned about the other companies in the group. We're just looking at Lark selling STV or STV selling a building. Now we know that Lark bought the whole of the ordinary share capital of STV in 2018 for 550,000. So I might just highlight useful information. You don't have to, but sometimes when you've got a big section like this, it is worth highlighting the information that's going to be relevant for the bit that you're answering. We've got some information about the strip building, which was purchased from an unconnected person in October 2019, it says. So that's relevant for option 2. We've also got some information about the trademark, and the final part of this is calculating the profit from the sale of that trademark. So that's going to be relevant there. It's a profitable company, there are no losses. So this question is not about losses, which is where it's really important that you read carefully. Often the group's questions will involve losses, but not here. And we've got the 2 options to take place on the 31st of March. So that's shortly after the date of our memorandum. Option 1, Lark sells the whole of the ordinary share capital of STV to an unconnected company for £920,000. And that's all the information we have. So now we can think about option 1. And what I would do is just very quickly put in some ideas. Company selling shares in another company. So that's the substantial shareholding exemption. We've got 100% share. And we can see that those shares were acquired in May 2018. So I would just be popping down a few key points to remind me. Substantial shareholding exemption does have some conditions. We've got to have at least a 10% share, so you need to remember these conditions, owned for 12 months in the previous 6 years, and the company being sold has to be trading. And all of those conditions are satisfied here. So all I will then need to do to finish my answer is just to flesh that out and refer to the information in the question. Option 2, STV sells its assets, ceases trading, pays a dividend to Lark. And the transactions we've got here, the Strick building is going to be sold to VAR Limited. So that's our option 2. And VAR Limited is actually also 100% owned by Lark. So that is going to be the sale of an asset within the group. So what I will need to write about here is it's a sale within a 75% gains group, and that's going to be no gain and no loss. And be very specific. There are lots of different types of groups for tax purposes, so you need to make sure that you refer to the conditions. But it's explaining not just the corporation tax implications for STV, but also stamp duty land tax implications. And always look back at the requirements, look at exactly what you're required to do, because stamp duty land tax is usually payable by the purchaser on land and buildings, but not when they are part of the same 75% group. So again, just pop my notes there. No stamp duty because we're in a 75% group. And then finally, we've got the trademark, which is going to be sold to an unconnected company for £50,000. So the trademark, I'd already highlighted the details about the cost of that trademark, and VAR has purchased a trademark on the 1st of May 2023, which is within the 12 months before this. And so because they're part of the same 75% gains group, if we've got a sale of an intangible and a purchase of a new intangible within the same group, then we will be able to claim intangibles rollover relief. So I can look back at the detail, but again, in my bare bones answer, sale of an intangible is going to give a trading profit, so proceeds less the tax written down value, and I need to think about rollover relief. So rather than doing a separate plan, which is what we used to have to do before you had the ability to delete things and add things in the software, what I would do is to start almost making my plan as I read through the information and then simply flesh that out to produce my final answer. So I've just shown you how I've fleshed out the first bit of this. I've just deleted the first part of the requirement. So this is the corporation tax implications. The sale will be exempt due to the SSE, the substantial shareholding exemption, as Lark has held more than 10% of the shares in STV for more than 12 months in the previous 6 years, since May 2018, and STV is a trading company. And that, as a marker, is going to look like a perfect answer. Nice short sentences. We had the key points. And the nice thing about doing this is if you do run out of time, which hopefully won't happen, but if you do, then even if you've just got some of these key points, you may still score some marks. But that is as much as we need to do to produce the final answer. And the other bit I want to show you is the taxable profit from the sale of the trademark. Because this is to calculate, I will do that in the spreadsheet. So what I would do here in my answer would be just to say see spreadsheet, so that the marker knows that the answer for this part is in the spreadsheet, and then set this up in the spreadsheet function. So I've just prepared the answer here. Profit on the sale of the S trademark, proceeds, less the tax written down value, and you can do simple workings in cells. Just be careful that you do actually put your minus signs in. So if you're using a formula and you want the total to be deducted, then you have to put the calculation in brackets. Again, this is why you've got to practice this. So the tax written down value is the original cost less the amortization to give a trading profit. And intangibles rollover relief is available because one of the other group companies has reinvested. Now, they haven't reinvested the full proceeds. They've only spent 40,000. This was a bit of a prize winner point. I would doubt whether many people got this. For intangibles rollover relief, the amount rolled over is going to be the lower of the amount reinvested or the proceeds minus the original cost. Quite tricky, but things like this, even if you didn't get it right, if you've actually spotted that rollover relief will apply, then there would be a professional skills mark at least. So cross-referenced so that the marker can easily see what I've done. And in this question, one of the communication professional skills marks was in fact for effective use of the tools. So if you've used both the spreadsheet and the word processor, then that will probably get you that professional skills mark. And in most questions, certainly the big 50 mark question, I would expect you to be using the word processor and the spreadsheet function. And the spreadsheet is not quite as easy to use as Excel, for example. You can't insert or delete rows. So just be a little bit careful. And again, as usual, the more you practice, the easier it gets. Okay, I hope you found that helpful. I've also provided some debriefs for the mock that's coming out soon as well to show you again how to produce your answers, how you might want to set those out in the software. Because of course, if you're using a paper book to practice questions, then obviously you can't see which bits would have been done in the word processor, which bits would have been done in the spreadsheet. So hopefully that's given you a few ideas there. And what I want to do now is just to give you a little bit more practical advice as well. And you haven't got a huge amount of time before the exam. Is it just over 3 weeks, I think? So what can you do between now and then to improve your chance of passing? Well, one of the most important things is to practice questions using the practice platform. And remember that on the practice platform, there is a blank workspace that you can use. So where you're practicing questions, even from like a revision question bank, go onto that practice platform and practice typing up your answers. So I'm rubbish at typing. I don't know about you, but it's really worth practicing. And so practice questions from your revision question bank using that software. So there's the blank software, and then you've also got, of course, the June 2024 exam. You can have a go at that. And there are some other practice exams in the software as well. And by practicing questions, hopefully that will help you to identify any weaker areas. So if you have a go at a question and then think, ooh, I don't know that, then it means that you can go back to your notes, go back to the technical content and have a look at those weaker areas. And particularly, as I've already said, it's important to make sure that you are up to speed with your TX knowledge. So sometimes you might find that the things that you don't know are actually brought forwards from TX. Lots of resources on the website. I've already mentioned that for TX, there are articles for ATX as well. There are topic explainers for both ATX and for TX to help you with that. And then, of course, there is the Study Hub as well, which has a full set of notes for all of the different papers. And the other thing which is really important is to attempt a mock exam. So there is a mock exam which is going to be released soon. I won't spoil the fun just yet by telling you when that's going to be released, but there is a mock exam, and you may have mock exams available if you're doing a revision course, but I would definitely advise you to have a go at a mock exam. And if there's a chance to do a mock exam, and even better still, get one marked, then make sure that you do that. So that's a good way of actually having a go at a whole exam and practicing managing your time, practicing things like, which question do you want to do first? Some people like to do question 1 first. Some people like to start with question 2 or question 3. Bit of audience participation now, just out of interest. And don't worry, this is completely anonymous, so I can't see your answer here. But do you practice questions on the practice platform? So you should be able to answer yes, no, or sometimes. So just to see whether anybody is using the practice platform already. Okay, I'll just give you another few seconds and then we'll see what the answer to that is. And the answer is, 43% of you say yes, fantastic, well done you. 40% sometimes, which I guess is really the same as yes, isn't it? And then 16% say no. So particularly those of you who've said no, that's something that you can really do to help yourself in these last few weeks, is to start doing that. So start doing that now. Next question that you practice, ditch your pencil and paper and have a go on the practice platform if possible. So that's one of the most important things that you can do to help to improve your score. And what I want to do as well is to look at some of the common mistakes that people make and think about how you might be able to avoid doing that in your exam. Now, nearly everybody that I speak to who wasn't successful will say, I messed up my time management, I missed out a question, or I missed out part of a question, I spent far too long on question one. And so if that's you, so if you're somebody who runs out of time, then that's something that you can practice and hopefully address. You need to make sure that you allocate your time. Now, if you allow 15 minutes of reading time and then 3 hours to answer the questions and allocate the time based on the technical marks, so the professional skills should just be picked up as you go along, you've got 2.25 minutes per mark. So work out how long you've got, make a note of the finishing time and watch that clock. And when the time is up, you need to stop and move on. If you find that you're running out of time, then it might be that you're maybe writing too much. So have a look at your answers. Have you written things that you didn't need to write? Could you maybe write in shorter sentences? And also remember that you only need to score 50% to score a pass. And there will usually be more than 100 marks available. So some of the technical parts might have, it might be a 10-mark section with possibly 13, 14, or even 15 marks available, but that will be capped. So always remember that not finishing a question doesn't mean that you won't pass. Not attempting a part of a question is going to restrict your chances. So the most important thing is to have a go at the whole exam and make sure that you spend the time so that you attempt all the different parts of the question and get the easiest marks. Anything that you're not sure of, have a go, but make sure that you don't just spend the whole time on one question, because that is a sure way of restricting your chances. So running out of time is one very common issue. Another thing that often happens is not addressing the requirement. So not actually answering the question that's set. It's something that the examiner's report often says, and ways that you can deal with that. Make sure that you look at the requirement. So sometimes actually typing it out, copying and pasting is great, it's really quick, but typing it out sometimes actually forces you to think, what does this mean? Read it very carefully, break it down. If it's got the word and, then that really means usually that there are two different things. So we saw that question one, corporation tax and stamp duty land tax. So that's two things that you need to address. And think before you answer. So don't just dive straight in when you see a group of companies and write everything you know about groups. Think about what's actually going to be relevant, because again, that's another way that you might run out of time. If you write everything about a particular area, then you're probably going to be writing too much and you won't have time to finish. Follow the instructions. So sometimes there are some quite detailed instructions in the requirements, but those are there to help you. So the examining team wants you to pass this exam. And if they give you a set of steps, then that's really them saying, okay, this is quite hard, so have a go and do it in this order. Only provide explanations if they are requested. So if it's calculate, you don't need to write explanations as well. As long as the marker can follow your calculations, that's fine. If it's explain with calculations, then you do need to provide explanations and calculations as well to maximize your chances. And when you're practicing questions, practicing the question in itself is only half the job. What you then need to do once you practice the question is to look at the model answer and really critically look at your answer as well. Because sometimes you look and you think, oh, yes, 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 yes. But then when you actually look at what you wrote, you'll find, oh, I didn't actually say that. So when you've attempted a question, have a look at the model answer, have a look at your answer, compare the two, and just think about maybe what you missed and why you missed that. So was it because you didn't read the requirement, or was it because you missed a clue in the question? If your answers are too general, then you're going to limit your chances. And you don't need lengthy introductions. If you're writing, say, a memorandum, just go straight in with the core stuff. And sometimes if I'm looking at somebody's answers, you can tell who doesn't really know what they're talking about, because there's a lovely introductory paragraph, which is great, but sadly won't score any marks at all. Any information that's not requested, even if it's correct, is not going to score marks. If the question is asking about capital gains tax and you write about inheritance tax, you're not going to score the marks for inheritance tax. Apply your knowledge to the facts. And one way that you can demonstrate that you've done that is by using information from the question. So use the names of the people, the companies in your answer. That helps to sort of illustrate that you have actually read the scenario. Use all the information from the scenario. And if you've got, say, a relief that has some conditions, then it's a good idea to state the condition and then show that you've applied that condition. So if we need 10%, do we have 10%? Okay. Be very precise, as I've said already. And you should always be thinking, as you answer the question, and using the word because or as. So, I don't know, Fred is UK resident because he has been in the UK since 2019, say. So every time you're actually answering a question, you should be thinking about why something applies. Okay, just a quick extra question here, which is really just for me to give you an excuse to say when these things are going to happen. Do you know when the pre-September mock and the debriefs are going to be released for advanced tax? Okay, 13th of August and 19th of August. So the first date is for the mock, the second for the debriefs. 9th of August and the 19th, 12th and the 16th, or D, don't know. I always have to check this before my webinar. Sometimes I forget, but today I have checked. Okay, shall we find out? Put you out of your misery. Right, well, 48% of you are actually right. So the mock exam will be released on the 12th of August. So that is going to be available on the practice platform. So definitely have a go at that. It's a really good mock exam. It's in proper exam format. It's got, once you've attempted it, you should be able to go in, have a look at the model answers and the marking guide. And then on the 16th of August, you will be able to access the debriefs. So what I've done is I've done a full debrief of all three of the questions, which will show you how you should have presented your answer and give you an idea of how I think the marks would be awarded. So then you can hopefully self-mark your mock exam. So definitely have a go at that. It's free. We all love free stuff, don't we? So go onto the practice platform and have a go at that exam. And so all that remains then in the last section of this webinar is for me to have a look at some of your questions. So I think I've got some questions coming in here. Let me just have a look at the folder. So I'll try to pick out first question. Can we pass based mainly on theory? Explain the question. Well, hopefully I've answered this already, but you need to apply your knowledge. So if this is asking, can we just pass based on theory, then you need to make sure that you apply that theory. If it's asking, can I pass just by explaining without doing any calculations, then I think that will be tricky, because usually about half of the marks in the exam are for explaining and half will be for calculating. So you need to know your theory, but you also need to apply it. And you do need to explain when you're asked to explain, but also calculate if you're asked to calculate. And if it's a calculation question, then you won't get credit just for explaining. Let's have a look. Oh, we've got a technical question here. I always like a technical question. When an item is disposed at a gain, will there be capital gains and also a balancing charge if the capital allowance pool balance is nil? So the answer to that is there could be. So for example, if you were selling plant and machinery where there have been capital allowances and you've sold that at a profit, then there could be a balancing charge for capital allowances, which will basically just reverse the capital allowances that have been claimed to kind of take you back to zero. And then the profit that's been made will be the taxable gain. Now, it won't always apply because, of course, sometimes plant and machinery is exempt. If the individual items are less than £6,000, then that would be covered by the small chattels exemption. So sometimes if an item is disposed at a gain, there could be a capital gain and a balancing charge. So I hope that's answered that one. Next question here. I've started studying about 2 weeks ago and haven't yet covered all of the study material. What's the best way to allocate my efforts now? So 2 weeks ago is quite recent. You've still got 3 weeks to go. I have seen it done before. I would say that you do need to make sure that you cover the study material. So you can't really apply that until you've got the knowledge. So you do need to make sure that you actually cover the study material. But really, you should be practicing questions now. So ideally, with 3 weeks to go, this should be where you're consolidating your knowledge and then starting to practice questions. Okay, but we are all different. And I did once know somebody who had studied TX syllabus rather than ATX syllabus and only discovered this, I think, about a week before the exam, but still managed to score a pass. So all is not lost, but ideally by now you should be applying your knowledge to questions. We have a question here. How many marks are there for ethics in the exam? Now, in the advanced tax exam, this is the only thing that's guaranteed. There are going to be 5 marks in question 1, not specifically for ethics, but for ethical issues. Now, there's a really good article on the ACCA's website which covers ethics questions and gives you some examples of things that could be tested. So we've got the ethical principles. We've got things like what we need to do if we take on a new client, what happens if we have an HMRC error. The June exam covered tax avoidance, tax evasion, and the general anti-abuse rule. So there are quite a number of different areas that can be tested. And the best way to practice for those ethics bits in the exam is going to be have a look at that article if you haven't read it already. So that's really helpful. It gives you some examples taken from past exam questions. Practice questions. So if you make sure that you have a go at as many questions from part A of the exam as possible, they will all have ethics bits in. So you can have a look at the answers to those and see the kind of thing that the ACCA will be given credit for. Because I think sometimes people think, oh, well, I know all about ethics, I'm an accountant, but ethics in real life and then what you need to write to answer an exam question are sometimes not quite the same thing. So read the article, have a look at past exam questions, and there will be 5 marks. Question here, can you suggest what should be done between the 1st of September until the 5th? That's a very specific set of dates. So I'm guessing, is this somebody who's got some holiday between them? Well, in those final few days before the exam, I think the best thing to do is to make sure that you carry on with your question practice and make sure as well that you're practicing a good spread of questions. So I was hopeless as a student. I always used to do the income tax ones because I liked income tax, but you need to make sure that you practice a really broad range of questions. So, you know, if you've got a question bank, a revision question bank, often they're split into sections. So be disciplined. So, right, I'm going to do a question from this part, then I'm going to do a question from that part, and make sure that you practice questions on lots of different areas. And then as you practice those questions, hopefully that will highlight any areas where you've maybe got gaps in your knowledge, which you then can address. Now, this is a very, very good question. Is it a good idea to start with 25 marks questions first and the 50-mark question last? And the only thing I will say there is it is entirely down to personal preference. Now, for me personally, I think I probably would start with the 25-mark questions because they're a little bit more straightforward. They're a bit shorter. The requirements are actually proper requirements. You don't have to go digging around in an email. And so the 25-mark questions can be a little bit more straightforward, or at least a bit easier to get your head around. All I will say is that you must allocate your time so that you've got enough time to do that big 50-mark question properly. So when you're allocating your time, as I've said, you need to be making sure if you're using 3 hours to answer the exam, that you've got an hour and a half left to answer the 50-mark question at the end. So that's where it helps to practice doing mock exams, or what you could do is to take the practice exams from the practice platform and have a go at those and say, right, okay, I'm going to practice this whole exam as if it's the real thing. So I'm going to practice this one starting with the 25-mark questions, and then maybe practice one of the others starting with the 50-mark question, and see which you prefer. So hopefully that will then help you. But the key thing is that you have a go at all of them and make sure that you do have a go at each part of all of those as well. Another good question here. If we're asked for a report, is an introduction and conclusion necessary? So sometimes you do have reports in the advanced tax exam. You don't really need much of an introduction. So I would say that as long as it says report to, from, date and subject, and then it's got the headings, then you don't really need a lengthy introduction. If you do put an introduction, just very, very short, because that's not specifically going to get credit. And conclusions are only necessary if you are asked to come to a conclusion. So I see sometimes people putting a report and then at the end saying, this report has addressed all these areas. No point. You don't get extra credit. If the question, however, says, advise on which option is best, option 1 or option 2, then that's where you would get credit for a conclusion. Have we got time? Got time for a couple more? So how much is calculation and explanation ratio in the advanced tax exam? So I think I did mention this. There's no guarantee, but I would say roughly 50-50. So half calculations, half explanations. Does vary slightly. There's no guarantee, but usually that will be the kind of ratio that we can expect. A question about the question from the exam that I ran through. If a question asks to explain corporation tax implications, do you not need to do calculations to show the tax saving? So the answer in that question was no, you didn't. So in that particular question where I was just explaining, then you didn't actually need the calculations as well, apart from where it said to calculate the taxable trading profit. So if it says explain, then you can explain. I would say, though, that if there are figures in the question, then those figures can be useful. So you might want to refer to some of the figures in the question, but usually the figures will just be showing the level of profit maybe, or whether they've actually made a profit or a loss in the first place. Okay, I think probably we might have to wrap up. I'm just going to have a quick look to see if there's anything else. So a question here, if I focus on corporation tax and income tax questions only, is there a good chance of securing a pass? Well, it's risky. So with this exam, you might be lucky, you might not. All I would say is the more different subjects you know, the more likely you are to pass. But it's like if you're in a casino and you put all your money on one number, not that I would do that, obviously, but you might win, but then there's a very high chance that you won't. So the more different areas you cover, the more likely you are to have one of those or all of those appear in the exam. So I shall stop there. So I hope I've answered most of the questions that we've got. I do apologise if I haven't covered everything, but I think we're just about running out of time. So I will hand over to Kirsty. Is there anything you want to say
Thanks, Helen.
before we finish,
Absolutely,
Kirsty?
yes, that is us pretty much out of time, so we do need to wrap up, but just a few quick things before we close. So firstly, a quick reminder that all of the resources that we have referred to today and more are available in the resource section of the webinar. So that includes a PDF copy of Helen's slides from today's webinar. It includes copies of the latest examiner reports, details of the pre-September 2024 mock exams in the practice platform and the accompanying debrief that Helen has done. You'll have links to technical articles and topic explainers for ATX, and you'll have links to the ACCA Study Hub and the Student Study Resources YouTube channel. So there's lots and lots of really good content there. Everyone who registered for this webinar will be getting an email with details of how they can listen to this again, so look out for that in your inbox tomorrow. Huge thank you to Helen for sharing her time and expertise with us today, and a big thank you also to the ACCA team who have been supporting us at the back end to deliver this session. And finally, thanks to all of you for joining us today. I do hope you found it useful. So goodbye from today's webinar and good luck for your exams next month.
Thank you very much. Hope it goes well.